Okay, so I'm starting the recording. So one quick thing, Rajesh, I'll just give you a little background on the book's summary of like almost like 30 seconds, right? So basically, the fundamental belief is that everybody has a baseline of happiness. A good thing happens, bad thing happens. After 3, 4 months, 6 months, we come back to our baseline. So the thing is that if you can work on that baseline by sort of almost like a muscle on a day-to-day basis, by set of actions that we perform every day, and have a sort of a belief system that we follow, then we can increase that baseline. So if you are right now 80 on 100, can you take it to 83 on 100? So even though COVID-19 may bring you to 65, but after that you come back to 83 instead of coming back to 80, right? So fundamentally, if you ask me, every single book that I've read, every single talk that I've heard, all focus on these actions. So actions are exercise and meditation, etc. Very few of them are actually talking about belief systems. And what I've seen is most of the people that I've interviewed and people that I've spoken to, a lot of our happiness comes from these belief systems that we have. A belief system could be that, let's say I have a belief system like trust everyone. Somebody else may have a belief system about money. Somebody have a belief system about karma. These are slightly sustainable things. So if you take the first half of the thing is actions which are like very dopamine and very, very action oriented, dopamine, endorphin kind of things, right? While if you take belief systems are more like serotonin and oxytocin, which are long-term happiness chemicals, right? So generally what I want to do is that I want to like people who I respect, people who have sort of lead a very purposeful content kind of a life, right? And you would be one of them. I want to understand the belief systems of each person and even the action phase, what are the thoughts they have, right? So I think I'll start off with saying, Rajesh, I think from a just material point of view, right? I feel you're one of the most humblest guys I've met, right? So if you have 100 rupees in your pocket or you have 1,000 crores in your pocket, your lifestyle remains exactly the same. And probably it has remained for the last 25 odd years. After selling something of 500 crores or like $100 million plus in your early 30s, after that, I don't think there is iota of difference in your lifestyle, the way you used to live before or now. So that's very, very unusual. Would love to know your philosophy about money and what prompts you to even makes you this ambitious person who wants to conquer the world and still have zero benefit of that wealth that you will create in personal life.
Yeah, so thanks for inviting me, Vivek, for the conversation. So I have to tell you a little story which will answer the question that you asked. So it was the day after the India World deal. So the deal happened November 29th, 1999. So I was 32 years. I just sold the company for $115 million, predominantly cash. We had no outside investors. We were 20 people company. I'd struggled to raise capital for the previous few years. A month before that, the only deal that I had on the table sort of for venture capital investment fell through. And I remember going on a vacation just after that deal sort of didn't happen to Singapore with my wife. And I was walking around like a zombie because I said, everyone else is raising money. The only hope that we had, and I'd been working on that deal for the last 6 months. And that has now gone. How are we going to compete with the others? All of these questions were in my mind. And a month later, I'd sold the company for $100+ million. So that's life. The day after the deal, so the morning after, my wife tells me, Bhavna, and she was an equal partner really in the entire project, in entire India World that we had done. She tells me that nothing should change in our life. If you think about the money that you have in the bank, you will never do anything again in life. So what's done is over, forget about it. Now restart from scratch. And I think that's really, when you talk about the belief system, that I think has been core to the thinking. So even after the India World deal, we lived in the same house, about 900 square feet for many years after that. Same car, same house. We only shifted homes because the building in which I was living in had structural issues. My father, being a civil engineer, he said, look, this building is unsafe. We need to move to a better place. So that's when we moved to a bigger house nearby. So essentially, I think in life, the way I've always sort of looked at it is that money really buys you freedom in a sense. But then if you think about the money that you have, you will not do anything else. In fact, the deal for me was a defining moment. And at that time, there was another interesting conversation. I was in actually two minds whether to sell the company or not, because it was a company where I had given my life and blood for 5 years, both Bhavna and me. And when we got the offers, and we had two competing offers on the table, which were sort of equally large. DSP Merrill Lynch was our advisor. So I was talking to Hemendra Bhai and asking him for advice, saying, I told Hemendra Bhai that, look, Hemendra Bhai, I don't need so much money. All I wanted to do was to raise maybe 10 crores, 15 crores so that I could build the business. I wanted to create a build to last business. And his words, sort of a couple of things which he said, I think again stayed in my mind. He said, first, he said, Rajesh, it'll be very hard for you to get this kind of an offer again. Okay, do the deal. You will have a lot of ideas in your life. What this money will do, essentially get you freedom, get you the luxury to do what you want in life. I think that's very, very important. The second thing he said, which is not linked with directly the happiness part, but I think it's equally good advice for any entrepreneur. He said, the most important thing in life when you're running a business is it's not about knowing when to enter a business. It's about knowing when to exit. And those are things which have sort of founded or have grounded me in some ways, and also served as foundation for my thinking.
So in fact, like what you said about living in the same house and the same car for many years after that is actually news to me. So in my book, I have this TEDx talk which says that money can buy you happiness. But actually what you say is the most appropriate thing, is that I think money gives you the freedom to do only the things that you love doing, and sort of have this freedom not to do all the things that you don't want to do. So I'm very clear in my life that I will do things that give me joy. I'll work with people who increase my joy. And if I can avoid anything that drains joy for my life, I think that is the freedom that I think money buys you. That when you don't have that compulsion to do a lot of things that you don't want to do, or reduce your joy, but because they're paying you and you need that money, then it becomes very, very difficult for you. So I don't agree with you, but my book talks about this thing is that if you want to use money for increasing happiness, then everything that you upgrade in life has to be by a minimum factor of 4x. They can be experiences, they can be material objects. So either you don't upgrade. So if you have the car, you will keep the same car till the time you meet your maker. But if you want to upgrade your car, it has to be minimum of 4x of your previous car. Same thing about your house, same thing about every single thing that you own in your life. So it also gives you priority. What are the things that you want to upgrade? What are the things you don't want to upgrade? Also, it's about experiences. So, about a year back, I went to the Arctic Circle with 80 people from 40 different countries. But again, that was 4x of any of my past experiences. So whether it's material acquisition or an experience, it should be 4x. If you can't afford a 4x, be patient. You have to wait. You can't say, Acha, abhi, let me just do 2x right now or do 1.5x right now. So people think it's a philosophy of spending money, but I think it's a way of saving money, because when you're preparing for it, it almost ensures that you don't have any downgrades in your life. Because imagine you're saving for 4x house, then chances of you having to sell your house and move into a smaller house is impossible. It's only when you stretch 20%, 30% more than what you can afford, that's the time when you have challenges. When you try to do 4x, then you won't even get a mortgage for 4x. So, yeah. No, fascinating, Rajesh. So let me come to some of the actions that we all do, right? Which very quantifiably increase happiness. It's almost like a discipline, right? And I think you are one of the most disciplined people I know. Would love to know your actions that you do on discipline in terms of whether it's exercise, whether it's sleep, whether it's these things which are being covered in a lot of books. But I think they are the backbone. So you can't have a belief system and have, no actions and discipline behind it. So actions is obviously a very critical part of the book, but belief system creates sustained happiness, but actions create the backbone. So we'd love to know your disciplines that you have in your life, which basically you've been following for all these years.
So there are a few things which I've learned through the years. So I wasn't obviously always like this. But for the past many years, I try to make every day reasonably similar in terms of waking up, when I have breakfast, when I have lunch, when I have dinner, when I go to sleep. So these are some of the invariants which are there. So I tend to wake up roughly around 4:30 a.m. every day. And I find the morning times basically the best time for thinking. So there's clarity of thought, there is darkness in the world, there is no interruptions. And I'll just sit in my chair and I just let the thoughts flow. I don't really start with a specific agenda. Sometimes it could be something which I thought about the previous day, or something which needs thinking, or a presentation which needs to get done during the day. I'll just think through some ideas. And then I'll go for a walk for about 30 minutes in my building compound. So that gives me about an hour plus, okay, to myself. So where it's just me and my thoughts. I always have my book with me, wherein I will write down everything. I'm a person who likes to write everything. So I have these spiral notebooks, 300 page. Again, I've standardized on a lot of these small things. The pen I use, the book I use. So whichever ones I use, I'll get dozens of them. So I never run out of any of those. So I think best when I'm just writing down my thoughts. And this I'd read in a book by David Allen, Getting Things Done, a long time ago, where he said, keep the mind always free. So new things can sort of enter inside. So if there's any to-do which is there, anything, any thought which comes into your mind, just put it down somewhere. So for me, it is my book, or in cases, in the small scenarios, where a few scenarios where I can't have my book, I have a piece of paper in my pocket with 2 pens. In case one pen runs out of ink, then I know there's a second pen. The pens are of different colors, so blue and black. So I always know the black pen will always have ink. I hate to want to borrow a pen from someone else. I'm not a very digital person in that sense. I still prefer the drawing and pen and paper, because I worry about gadgets running out of battery. Pen and paper works perfectly. So that way, keep the mind free, write down everything. I use a 300-page book because I'm never worried about, I'll run out of paper. So it's infinite pages, as it were, which are there. And then try and standardize the day. So the time when you have breakfast, the time when you have lunch, etc. Because that sort of brings a discipline to the daily day. And even sleeping time at night, because you need 6.5, 8, 7.5 hours of sleep. So I tend to sleep by typically 9:45, 10. Another thing which I do during the day is, one of the, what actually becomes a big challenge for a lot of us is also the interruptions which keep coming in. So messages which come in, phone calls which come, emails which come, which need to be replied to. So in all of this, what happens is that we lose, I think, one of the most precious resources that we have, which is contiguous time. So anytime you have to switch an activity and come back, this whole context switch, there's a high cost to it. So I let the messages come. I have notifications off everywhere on my phones, etc. Even when calls come, unless it is someone from the family or it's a person I absolutely must answer, I will let the phone ring and I will call back when I want to call back, rather than let someone else intrude on my time. Because I think at our levels, what's very important is we have not only, it's one is meetings is one thing, in meetings you have to be there and all the time, but we also need that time to think about the big picture, to think what have we learned in the day which changes our mental models. So what have I learned which, something in my mind on some specific idea which I need to tweak and therefore make better, which I need to dig deep into. So you need to have that time where you can also start probing your sixth sense. So in a meeting, typically, when you're doing a presentation, you will always get that thing. There's a word which a customer says or someone says on the other side. Now, if I don't write it down immediately, I'm going to forget it by the end of the meeting. Yeah. So in meetings, again, I have the discipline of just writing notes. And it's both a combination of what the other person is saying, key points which are being said, but also how those things are interplaying with my own thoughts. Because typically many times you have back-to-back meetings. So that buffer which is there to think is gone. And if you just keep listening to yourself, I think you'll get a lot of feedback from your own mind. Hey, you know what? That's a new idea. That's something which needs to be probed. There's an action to be done. So if an action item, I'll write at the top of my book. So there's a to-dos running list which is there. So I scratch it out only after it is done. So I'm not worrying after a meeting that, hey, I have to do something. So once you build this discipline, the mind is always clear, for thinking, for accepting new inputs. There are very few distractions which are there. And I think that just helps in creating a very sort of feeling of equanimity, which in a way leads to at least not discontent, if not happiness and joy.
Yeah, but I think Rajesh, it's a very important point, right? Because what happens is that when you keep things in your mind, right, it creates this anxiety. So basically what happens is that creates cortisol, right? Cortisol was a chemical when there was a ruffle in the grass. That's the chemical human beings had. So forget about everything and, create that anxiety and run, right? But the fact of the matter is that I think the continuous time that you say has been described as a flow, has been described in so many different words. But, so that book by, I think, Neer, Indistractable, right? Where I started using this app called Forest app, which basically does the same, that you install the Forest app, and then if you 30 minutes, you touch your phone, then the tree dies. So when he says is that if you get a thought also, you write it down, or you want to research something, etc., write it down. But for 10 minutes, you can't pick up your phone, or you can't do anything else than what you're doing right now. So I almost do this Pomodoro technique of 25 minutes with one thing at one time. And I think what you're saying is right. It just gives you this equanimity that you just basically have this feeling of calm, in control, because you're scheduling things. And I think it's a very integral part of happiness, according to me. I think most people who accomplish a lot more, I think they have some version of this. And as we talked about, that fortunately, a little bit of the money that you make reduces the number of people whose call you have to pick up.
Absolutely right.
Okay, what about meditation? Have you done meditation? Do you do meditation?
No. So I don't do yoga or meditation. For me, the exercise is my walk that I do about 30-35 minutes every day. And now, of course, because of the lockdown, I do another 25 minutes with my son every evening. But that's more a more leisurely walk. It's just chatting. But I don't do meditation. For me, I have a different view on meditation. Okay, it's the time when I'm sitting in the morning after waking up. Okay, that for me is a sort of form of meditation where I'm there with my book and my thoughts. Okay, there is nothing else which is interrupting me, nothing else which is distracting me. So I find that to be very, very helpful. For me, one of the most productive times also in my life for the last many, many years has been on the long flights. I don't know when we'll be able to do that again, but the long flights in business class, okay, are incredibly helpful. So I use those for just writing out thoughts, reading a book or something like that. And again, the thing is that kind of 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours is again very hard to get in today's life. where you literally don't have to get up from there. Anything you want is going to be served to you right on your table. You don't even get that at home.
Sure.
Okay. So those are very productive times. See, because at I think at one level, if you think, there is actions which we need to get done. Okay. So there's a day-to-day list of 20, 30 things that you have to do for your regular business or for other people, etc. But then unless you keep time for yourself, for ability to think, what are the next ideas that I want to work on or I'm working on? How do I get those breakthrough ideas? How do I get that time to read a book? And for me, books are also more as triggers for ideas, because when I'm reading something, I find many a time that the subconscious, the problem which is playing in my mind, I'll get some interesting solution. Doesn't matter which book you pick up. It's just the act of diversion, which really helps you in terms of framing your own thoughts clearer, etc. Because as leaders, it's very important that we have to really drive or push the envelope when it comes to new ideas. And how are those going to come? So meditation by itself is not something I've been sort of very fond of, but I look at my meditation is really in my sort of walk and in my sitting, when I sort of meditate when I'm with myself. I don't have to close my eyes to necessarily do it. I think the book and pen in my hand is my form of meditation.
In a way, I think you're right. I think one of the things that you mentioned about, this doing something without a distraction. So the way I've actually now begun to define meditation is, it's more like if you're aware of every single moment that you live, and you're mindful and be in the present. And if I'm talking to you right now and that's all I'm doing right now, in a way, that's what dhyana is, right? That's what meditation is. So it doesn't have to be that closing the eye and not trying to think of any thoughts. So I was fortunate enough to do Vipassana, and I have been meditating almost regularly every single day. But I think the way I'm looking at it is that how can I make that half an hour meditation that I do every day, how can I make it a part of my entire waking cycle? Actually, the ideal situation would be that I should not get any dreams either. So my meditation should continue 24 hours a day, where basically dreams also manifest because your thoughts are still coming in, right? So your goal should be that, if you can be in this moment and that's all you are in, and you're in that moment all the time, then that's in a way achieving this whole meditation concept of it.
Very right.
So one quick thing on, I think I've always also found you also have this grand ambitions in terms of purpose. I think that is another thing which has been very critical for people, where whether the purpose is business oriented, where you are talking about things like, putting a, computer on every desk, like what Bill Gates had, but it's also in terms of, you were discussing this concepts of having these public libraries or having this long-term purpose, which I think is a very essential thing of, moving the needle, right? So moving the needle, because money-wise and, company-wise, there's only so much you can do. It moves the needle this much, but it's not going to move the needle. So I'll talk about this soul concept, which I'm almost an atheist. So soul concept is something which is beyond me, but how I use it for empowering myself, I'll share with you. I'm just 1 second, Rajesh. Yeah. So, so sorry, last question that I asked was what?
Around soul.
Soul. Okay, so that
about soul.
Different thing, but
the whole purpose point.
Purpose point. I would love to know your thoughts on that whole purpose thing.
So, in a way, this whole idea around purpose also links back to how I see myself, and this is as an entrepreneur. Okay, and what is an entrepreneur? Basically, an entrepreneur is going out there to find gaps in things which exist and solve those problems. An entrepreneur actually is contrary, I think, to popular opinion, is not the person who takes risk. Is going out there every day to reduce the risk of failure. It's the other way around. So in a way, I've been an entrepreneur for the most part of my life. And I only worked in one job, and then I'd seen my father as an entrepreneur, and that's what I wanted to really become. So when you are an entrepreneur, by definition, you need to have some sort of purpose, destination, because you have to live in the future. You are creating for a world which is few years ahead. So in my life, there are basically two strands that I see now. One is as a tech entrepreneur. Okay, so how do I want my, excuse me, my company to grow and become in the next few years? What are the next challenges which are there? How are we going to overcome them? And the second is on the, I call myself a sort of political and prosperity entrepreneur. And that gives my second purpose. That how is it that we can transform India? And that actually was not there for a long time. I remember 2008 end, December, a friend of mine asked me a question. He said, Rajesh, you see all the things that are going wrong in the country. When your son grows up and asks you, Papa, you had the time, you had the money. Why didn't you do something about it? What will you answer him? And that was the moment when I started thinking on the second track. So again, in both these things, what's common is that how do we look forward to the future? How do we then craft a path from here to there? And as entrepreneurs, really what we are working on, there's no map. There's no defined map that is there. It's a compass. So essentially, directionally, we know most of the times we are going to fail in our efforts of trying to create something new. And I've failed enough times in my life. I keep saying out of 25 things I've probably tried in my 25 years as an entrepreneur, other than maybe 3 or 4, almost everything has failed. Every failure is hard. It makes you think about your core purpose. It creates unhappiness, distress, anxiety, all of that. It doesn't matter how many times you have failed in the past. Every failure is different. And therefore, I think it is very important to keep the longer term view in mind. That, okay, while we are active, how is it that we can take up big goals? Again, another point someone had said is that, look, whether you have a small goal or a big goal, it's going to take the same amount of time. And the odds of success or failure are pretty much the same for a new venture. So might as well aim for big ideas that you want to be able to transform. One of my favorite quotes is by this builder, Burnham, make no little plans, and so on. That quote goes on. So if you start thinking like this, automatically sort of the purpose keeps coming. And I also, you talked about sort of the belief system. Another one of my things is that the Alchemist book by Paulo Coelho, that once you start on a path, the universe sort of conspires to help you. So these are things I strongly believe in. I mean, there is some element of sort of spirituality, I guess, also embedded in there. I think to do all of this, the other thing which I have tried to do in life is to have, to try and remove sort of, to bring in a detachment, to remove emotions as much as possible. Because otherwise, when you're happy, you go here, and when you're sad, you go down. If you just take this as part of life, okay, the good days are not going to be there forever. The bad days are not going to be there forever. And maybe some of this came because I failed a lot in my early days as an entrepreneur. And that sort of steeled me. So that even when I had the big successes coming, sort of part of life, because you always know that in a future moment, okay, there's going to be something different.
So I'm going to share 3-4 things with you because I think as I'm conducting the interviews, I'm realizing that I think there is this jugalbandi which is possible, right? When some of the things you mentioned resonate so much with some of the experiences and thoughts and stories in my life. So the first thing, there's an interesting quote by Harvey in Suits TV show, which says that it's not that I don't believe in emotions, I just don't believe in having them. So emotions can be used very effectively, but it's no use having them. And I think Alchemist book, I think my view on the book is every time you read the Alchemist book is going to mean something else to you. So I've read it almost 5-7 times by now, probably more. And every single time I've read it, it has meant completely different than what it meant to me before that. So it's one book which is almost like a chameleon that keeps changing colors in terms of what it means to you every time you read it. And I think this book also, now, Rajesh, it's actually a compass towards happiness. Because I say that this is not something that will make you happy. The purpose is to make you happier, reduce the volatility of happiness in your life. And that's how I'm looking at it as a compass, right? It should point you in the right direction. If you exercise, it's no chances that you'll be less happier than what you were before, right? So if you make an exercise, same way. So I have some other belief systems that I wanted to bounce off with you, which I've covered in the book. So one of the belief systems that I have, Rajesh, is that I trust everyone. Till the time that particular person has given me a reason not to trust them, I trust everyone. And sometimes people say that that's almost being gullible or being somebody who per se will be less worldly wise, etc. What is your thoughts on this whole concept of trust?
I pretty much echo what you said, Vivek. I think to a large extent, I do tend to trust most people unless proven otherwise. I was much more trusting probably in early parts of my career. I've probably had some experiences which have made me a little less trusting over time, because you do meet some not so good people en route. But in general, my instinct is to trust people. And also be reasonably open with people. So it's what I call open sourcing. And I'll again, because with trust is also what you're telling. Trust is sort of also the conversations. Trust comes out in the conversations, what you're telling people. As an entrepreneur, one always comes up with new ideas, etc. And a lot of people used to tell me in the early days that, oh, you should keep your ideas to yourself. And I had exactly the opposite view. When I had the India World idea, in 94, when I was in the US on a 2-month break trying to figure out what to do with my life, I would talk to pretty much everyone I would meet about these ideas. And people would say that, why are you so open and trusting? I said, see, in the conversation, when I am open, I will get back something from you. Okay, something what you say. If I can walk away from a 1-hour conversation with one idea, one new thing that I did not know, it's the best conversation that I've had. It's a very useful conversation that I've had. And there is absolutely no way you can just take an idea and go and implement it. Okay, to make it successful. Okay, there are 100 things which have to go right. And you cannot replicate the entire set of mental models that I have leading up to that idea. It's not a widget. Okay, even a widget, how do you manufacture it? How do you market it? How do you brand it? All of those things start coming into play, which no one else can replicate. And over time, this has always helped me. This sort of twin thing of, in general, trust people. And second is share your ideas. Okay, be open with what you're thinking. I mean, even today, for a long time, I used to do this on my blog. I had a blog where I used to post daily for 13 years, from 1999 till 2012. And then I stopped because I started working in the political space. And in April, I've restarted my blog. And all these ideas around marketing, which really are what we are doing in my company, I put them out there first. It just helps me think more clearly when I write things out. And I think by being open, you tend to get back from the world, which I think is very important.
Yeah. So I think just, a couple of things I would like to share in this context, right? I think one, what you said is so right. Every single client pitch that I go to, if I have 10 ideas, I give all 10 of them away in the pitch. And every time people have told me that you should hold back something because if they hire you, it'll look like you don't have any new ideas. So I said that, listen, nobody hires you for the past. People hire you for the future. So the fact of the matter is that if I've given up everything that I have, and then if I'm so insecure that I'll not be able to come up with any new ideas for the client, then I'm in the wrong business. So if I have 10 ideas, I'll give all 10 of them away. If I get 2 more while I'm talking in the meeting, I'll give those away too. And I've always seen that in a longer run, right? It's built this credible, trusted relationship with partners where they know that Vivek has some thoughts he's going to share. Whether it's positive or negative, doesn't matter, but he's going to share. He's not going to keep quiet. And I think the other thing is that, this trusted thing also, right? For me, it actually came from a book that I read about 15, 18 years ago. It was a book by Stephen Covey's son. It was called The Speed of Trust. And if I just to take one thing that I took out of the book was that you can read your life only in two ways. One is you trust everyone. The other is not trust anyone. If you trust everyone, you may end up doing business and have relationship with hundreds of people. If you don't trust anyone, you will have a business relationship and that with tens of people. So even if you minus the few who may not be fair to you, the hundreds will give you a lot more back than those few who didn't, right? So in the larger scheme of things, the laws of the universe, you will actually get a lot more back than leading this life where you said, okay, you know what, I'm going to be suspicious of people per se.
Absolutely right, Vivek.
Okay, so the other thing which I feel that, which I'm going to cover as one of the belief systems of the book, is this whole thing on learnability, of learning new things. And I think this is something which I know you recommended me this course by Shane Parrish, which Decision by Design we're both doing. You read almost every day. So I think this quest for learning is very essential, I feel, from a bird's eye view of happiness. This has not been covered as a belief system from happiness point of view by most people, but I feel that it's a very fundamental belief system that growth allows you to be happier. And if you're not learning, whether it's through conversation, through books, through TED Talks, through whatever sources you have, it's very difficult for you to be happier if you're not growing. So in fact, Vishal Gondal, in my earlier interviews, shared a very interesting thing, which probably I'll repeat. He said that he looks at life that he is a version of a product. So right now he is, let's say, iPhone 11 Pro. But now iPhone 12 is going to come out. What are the improvements he's going to make in himself so that he's worthy of the upgrade next year? And this becomes a lifelong quest of, you can't have the next version of the product which has hardly any improvements done. So companies who are successful end up building products that are substantially different and better than the previous version of the product. And I think the same applies to men. So how do we become a better version of our own selves by improving the product? So learnability is something which I would love to have your thoughts on learning, and what is your philosophy about it? I know it's close to your heart.
I think learning comes with curiosity. I think it's very important to be curious in this world, because only then will you ask the questions which will start you on a journey of learning. Okay, and I've always this curiosity of knowing different things. Okay, traveling to places probably where I've not been before. Like I remember long time ago, in the early 2000s, I had to make a US trip. And then I said, why don't I just go by China? I'd never been to China. It was probably 2000 or 2001. So I just said, okay, I'll take the flight instead of going via the standard Europe connection, which used to be there. I said, I'll go to China. I'll spend 3-4 days there, and then I'll go on to wherever I need to go. So, and I think that's where those are the small things, so it's one thing is to have that curiosity. What are the steps you take then to actually implement on that curiosity? It's putting yourself in situations, in experiences, which are very different, that are there. So I've never minded trying out things at least once. Okay. So I remember, this is probably going way back, IIT, 1986. And I was quite sort of little obese at that time. For the IIT takes care of that, because the food you get is so pathetic, you tend to lose weight fairly quickly. But a lot of my friends were quite lazy, not walk, not run, nothing, not athletic at all. And in summer, there was this thing of the Himankan. So there was a trek to the Himalayas. So they had various groups which they would take in batches of 15, 20 to the Himalayas. So few of my friends said, Rajesh, there is absolutely no way you are going to go on this trip. The last person is going to be you. And then just for the heck of it, I said, chalo karte hai. And just like that, I signed up. I had no idea what I was signing up for. And it was a trek. It was almost like going into the unknown. Okay, so you have no idea what's coming. At that time, you didn't have like videos showing you, okay, this is what your day one is going to look like. And you had a 3-line description. It doesn't tell you the terrain you're going to walk on, the height you're going to reach, the rocks you are going to climb on, the tents you are going to live in. Okay, all of this was not available at that time. So I think that sort of curiosity has always been there. I remember in the US, before coming back to India, I again came in a conversation. A friend said that, look, there's this great train ride across America. I said, I've got to do that journey. So I used to work in New York. There was a meeting which came up on a Monday in San Francisco. So I went up to my manager and I said, look, if you give me one day off, which is the Friday, I'd like to take this train. The price from 9X's standpoint is going to be the same. So there's no extra money you're going to pay. But I'd love to travel in a train by myself for 3 days. And it was the most amazing thing. Most of the people on the train were, of course, the older set of people. But so New York to Chicago, and then you change trains, and then Chicago to, it was Oakland on the West Coast. Yeah. And the journey which was there is one of the most beautiful journeys. You're going through the mountains, you see the valleys, and you see the snow-capped peaks. And more importantly, I mean, you had conversations with strangers which would go on for 2-3 hours because no one's getting off the train. There are no deadlines. And it's something which I want to do again. I've told my son that one day we've got to do that. But it's really this whole thing of how can I get into or put myself into different scenarios, different situations, not all of which may be known in advance. So whether it is reading a book, okay. So just on the weekend, last week, I read a book. I don't read normally the serious fiction. I like the thriller fiction. But I read this book by Megha Mazumdar, which has come, A Burning, which has got fantastic reviews. So I read that, and it's a very gritty book, beautifully written, makes you think. And then on Sunday, one day in a year, I give to Daniel Silva's Gabriel Allon. So Daniel Silva is this author. Gabriel Allon is created the Israeli head of Israel's secret service, and is the most amazing person. I mean, 20 books, 20 years. And the day the book comes out, I will drop everything. And about 6 hours is basically spent reading. I told my son Sunday, I'm not going to be disturbed today. This is the Daniel Silva day. And so it's, the ability to sort of periodically shut off, periodically put yourself in different situations. And many times when I'm in a difficult situation, I keep thinking, I said, what would Gabriel Allon do? And that's sort of how life is. So there are many ways to learn, of course. There are books, there are conversations that you have with different people. I'm not much of a talker. I mean, someone sitting next to me on a flight, I'm not going to talk to that person also. I'm not very proactive. But if they talk, then I will, of course, respond. But put yourself in different situations. Like last time, I was in about 6-7 months ago, I was in the US. I remember in November last year, 2019. And I had to come from Boston to New York. And normally I would have just gone and taken the flight. I mean, it's a 1-hour flight, big deal. And I thought to myself, I used to take the bus when I didn't have money as a student way back. Yep. I said, let me do that again. And it was not easy because I had to lug my bags. They allow only one bag, and it was a $25 ticket, I mean. It was a double-decker bus. So I got myself the seats on the first row at the upper level. And it was the most incredible journey because it was slightly rainy. So it's a little foggy weather, but it was beautiful. Just looking out of the window for 3 to 4 hours. And then when it enters New York, it enters at the north end, Manhattan. And it takes you through all of those streets, Manhattan streets, which I'd never seen. I lived there for about a year and a half, but I never seen any of that. So I said, oh, this is incredible. I mean, that was a big bonus at the end of it. So if you just put yourself in different, just try out different things. Okay, I think that's how learnability happens. That's how, but it's an internal curiosity and it's an openness for new experiences, which is what sort of drives this whole new experiences.
I think, Rajiv, for me, I think there are two things that this has done, right? One, I agree with you. So I've actually done a Greyhound ride from East Coast to West Coast. And I had my paraglider with me. Again, I didn't have money, so I didn't have a choice. But it was a really cheap ticket. But I didn't realize that I thought I'll go and plonk myself and I'm going to, over 3 days, I'll be getting out, right? But it turned out to be that every 6 hours, 8 hours, they will just stop at some stupid thing and I have to change the bus. With my paraglider, with my bags, it was a horrendous experience, but it was an experience of a lifetime for sure. But I think the other thing that this learnability does is that it exposes you to a very, very new sets of people. So when I went to the Arctic, there were 80 people from 45 different countries, but one of them was like the head of Bain Consulting in India, somebody who had come down, built a sustainability company, somebody who actually is suffering from a degenerative disease and he's got lesser life to live. So the number of people and the kind of people you would meet and the conversation you would have in 11 days in the middle of nowhere in the Arctic Circle, it's just basically you build relationships with people. So whether it's learning paragliding or learning, or going to the Arctic or going for a TED conference or Singularity, all these things, right? You end up making these sets of friends.
Correct.
And this social friend circle that you make, I think not only obviously adds to learnability, but also gives you the sense of comfort, right? Because what happens is that I feel that I know that, God forbid, if I come into difficult times, there are 100 people who I can call. And I think that comfort probably creates this feeling of happiness at a certain level that, God is kind, there are 100 people who are there backing me, so I can take a few risks. In fact, the entrepreneurship thing that you mentioned, I think it's very critical. So I also decided to be an entrepreneur when I was 10 years old because my dad was on the dinner table and he asked me, what's the difference between a job and entrepreneurship? And his answer was that in job, you have to spend less than what you earn. In entrepreneurship, you have no limit to what you can spend. You have to just earn more than that. And I was 10-year-old thinking I'll become an entrepreneur. It took me 15 years to basically have any money to spend, but that was the experience of it. Yeah. I think last couple of things I wanted to cover. One thing was your thoughts on karma. And from a spiritual point of view, do you believe in spirituality? If yes, or is karma, especially karma, is something which is very integral part of my belief system. So would love to have your thoughts on the same.
So again, a sort of small story, which again changed my my thinking way back when during India World times, when we had a very difficult incident which took place, and I thought I'm going to fail again for the probably 4th or 5th time while we were running India World. And my wife and I, we used to work together. We used to go to office every day from our house at Nepean Road to Nariman Point. And we would stop by at the Babulnath Jain Mandir. She is very religious. She would go to the temple and I would sit in the car. So I would never get off and even have the courtesy of going into the temple. And then when that incident happened, I asked her, I said, what do I do now? I think I'm going to fail again. And she said that, look, the only person who can really help is God. And talk to him. And I said, what do you mean talk to him? He said, I'm going to go to the temple now. Why don't you come with me and talk? That was the first time I would have probably gone into a temple sort of somewhat willingly. Otherwise, yeah, you're forced into temples with family and all of those other things are separate. And I mean, it's probably hard to imagine, but in 2 days, things changed completely. And that was sort of the turning point in my spirituality belief. So I'm not very spiritual, but um, I sort of believe that God is everywhere. Whenever I have a problem, I sort of will close my eyes and say, okay, God, let's have a chat now on this matter. What's happening, sort of thing. But I always, so the broader point of karma is really that I have this, again, thanks to my wife, this whole belief. And this is the time she also told me she's told me this many times, especially because she's seen me all through the downs, especially through the years as an entrepreneur, that whatever happens, happens for good. It is many times, it is very hard to see the good when you are actually living through the difficult times. Okay. So, but when you look back, okay, there is a good reason why that thing happened. And it's in a way of sort of changes, discontinuities, disruptions. Okay. There's a sort of this creation and destruction sort of Schumpeter or our own Hindu mythology thinking. So, and that's a spirit it's a belief now, which I have that, and that helps sort of balance out the emotions also, the equanimity part, etc. I've failed many times. I failed with my political venture last year. But I take it in a stride that, okay, maybe that wasn't meant to succeed. And there's some good which will come out of it. I have learnings which I will take forward with me. I don't set out to fail, but if it happens, then that's how one has to think going forward. So this whole belief that if you stay positive in the mind that there's a good which will come out of it, I think helps you live life in a better manner, I think.
Yeah. Now, for me, I've had at least 5, 7, 10 incidents in my life where, in hindsight, 5-year period, 10-year period is the best thing that happened to me. Means even when I sold my company first time around in 2008, in a way, those days Aegis Media had walked out on us because of Lehman Brothers crash, and I almost was on the verge of bankruptcy. Some of the other we saved ourselves, but when I look at it back, of again working with them in 2012 onwards, my earnout would have been 2008 to 2012 would have been a bad earnout. I not only made probably 10x more money than I would have made if I'd sold in 2008, but more importantly that I matured as an entrepreneur in those hardships. In 2012, that 4 years made me a more seasoned entrepreneur. In 2008, I was a cowboy. It's, it's like, I'll wing it. Not a problem. I'm smart. I'm good. But I think that 4 years suddenly brings you back to reality and gives you this thing that you're not an invincible guy. You're just a human. All those things happen. So I think I matured as an entrepreneur, and to a certain extent, it was a blow of injection of humidity forcefully entered into my body. But I think definitely made me a more seasoned entrepreneur today than what I was when in 2008. So I think in hindsight, I think I'm so happy it happened to me that when it did. Okay, so I think we don't have any much time left right now, but I think we've covered pretty good ground, and any few further questions, we can do a short interview, 15-20 minutes again. Yeah, so I'm going to stop recording.